All right, it looks like I'm live again. Here I am live. I was hoping for a doggy to be in there, but I haven't got one today. So today, doesn't look too bad out there today. A little bit rainy, overcast. I just had them out. Today I'm going to start reading a new one that I recently got, and that's entitled Chin. I can see that now, but I'm colorblind, and I can see that now, the red on there, but when I look at it, generally I can't see it. Good morning to the one viewer that just went off. Yeah, I disabled the chat because it's just a distraction for when I'm reading, but it doesn't mean you can't go ahead and give me a like regardless. So this book is entitled Chin, The Life and Crimes of Mafia Boss Vincent Gigante by Larry McShane. I'll just read a few of the full of astonishment, a kind of dark wonder, Peter Hamill. Yeah. So without further ado, I've got so many books that I just don't really even want to read. I want to read them online. So when I want to read the other one, I probably go back and I had to probably have to redo that other one, because like 16 minutes into it, a business associate called and I had to take the call, right when I'm 16 minutes into it. So I'll probably reread that. That was in the, that's a good book, actually. Wasn't quite enjoying that. The Mafia Prince. They all have the same kind of title, I noticed too, eh? I also picked up The Irishman the other day, and I started watching a bit of it on Netflix, and I really wasn't that impressed, so I think I'll just stick to the book maybe. Chin, The Life and Crimes of Mafia Boss Vincent Gigante by Larry McShane. This is a Citadel Press, Kensington Publishing Corp book, Citadel Press Books. Prologue. Bringing it all back home. The old man, a bit of a bounce still evident in his step, moves easily along the sun-dappled sidewalks of his youth. His neatly pressed white shirt matches the hair trimmed short atop his well-worn face. The spry senior citizen, semi-retired and sharp as a stiletto at 82, is clean-shaven. A pair of glasses marks his lone concession to age. It's a warm spring morning, and Father Louis Gigante is headed to breakfast at the Pasticceria Bruno in Greenwich Village, where he was born in the first half of the last century. He's moved around across the decades, finally landing as a parish priest in the South Bronx. But the Roman Catholic priest, like an East Coast Tony Bennett, left his heart down here on Sullivan Street. Father Gigante's resume is impressive. Congressional candidate, city council member, social activist, urban developer in the South Bronx. He's met presidential candidates and cardinals, mayors and multimillionaires. It's been an interesting run. At one point, he recalls director Martin Scorsese expressed interest in making him a movie about this life of his. But today, Gigante is here to discuss someone else, his older brother Vincent, dead since 2005. For years, the Federal Bureau of Investigation and loudly insisted that Vincent, aka the Chin, had ascended through the ranks of the Genovese crime family. From street soldier to hitman to capo to the most powerful and feared mob boss in the United States of America. For just as long and just as loudly, Louis Gigante insisted that his brother was a sick man and capable of holding down even a menial job, much less running the nation's most lucrative and lethal mafia family. The priest didn't stop there. He denied the very existence of Italian organized crime in the United States, even as he lived in its epicenter. Through it all, the priest remained charismatic, quotable, indomitable, and he always looked good in a Roman collar. I just think it was his act, personally, no matter what he did. It sounds like if you're involved in the government, that sounds like you're up to no good. Through it all, yeah, I already said that. When federal prosecutors accused Vincent of crimes ranging from racketeering to murder, Louis paid his brother's legal fees and served as his sibling's unwavering public defender. When Vincent wandered these same streets in his bathrobe, Louis was often seen on his arm. The priest insisted that his brother, rather than a dangerous mafia don, was merely deranged. He's a mental case, the priest once said dismissively. Why don't they leave him alone? Vincent is ill. Vincent is in need of psychiatric treatment. Gigante orders a cup of espresso, an egg on toast, and sfogliatelle, a sweet Italian pastry. He's a regular at Bruno's. The cannoli, he confides, is the best in the 5 boroughs, and people come from far and wide to carry a boxful back home. It's right around the corner from the tenement where he grew up with Vincent, their brothers, and their immigrant parents. Father G, as he's known to friends, is the last of the Gigantes left in the old neighborhood. He lives across LaGuardia Place in an apartment that once belonged to his brother Pascal, and where Vincent eventually moved in with their mother. Father G still stops in during the week at the offices of the South Bronx Development Company that he founded back when the borough was famously burning. Weekends are spent upstate on bucolic property purchased from a close friend, the infamous music business executive Morris Levi, one of Vincent's business associates. Sometimes during his rural getaways, he'll light a cigar and relax, the fragrant smoke wafting silently toward the ceiling. The priest's eyes narrow. When he's making a point, and they dance when he's making a joke. He reaches across the table to touch an arm gently for emphasis during a 90-minute stroll down his personal memory lane. I was always at Vincent's side, and he had the greatest regard for me, he says in a raspy voice. He was the proudest guy in the family about me becoming a priest. My whole family loved it, but he cherished it because He was a religious man. He tells a few old tales of life in the neighborhood, about his hard-working parents in his childhood on Sullivan Street, about growing up with Vincent. He talks about the bonds of loyalty and devotion shared with his departed brother. I certainly knew, and he knew, that he could always depend on me and trust me. I was very, he was very proud of me. And then, out of the blue, Father Gigante has a confession to make. Was my brother the boss of the Genovese family? He asked aloud. Yes. He rose to that, picked purposely by Vito Genovese. Packed crowd today. Chapter 1. Another side of Vincent Gigante. One chin, two faces. Over 2 decades atop the Genovese crime family, Vincent the Chin Gigante was a man perpetually divided. He was a ruthless mob boss. He was a helpless mental patient. He controlled a far-reaching business that earned tens of millions of dollars. He rarely ventured more than a 1-hour car ride from his Greenwich Village roots. He was a man in the Genovese crime family. He was a baptized member of the Holy Name Society at Our Lady of Pompeii Church. He callously ordered the deaths of other mobsters, including the Gambino family boss John Gotti. He was raised a devout Roman Catholic, attending Sunday Mass until his death. He was widely considered among the brightest in the Mafia underworld, with a vision beyond that of his old contemporaries. He was a high school dropout with a recorded IQ just north of 100, a slightly above average score. He had a wife and 5 kids in a house in suburban New Jersey. He kept a mistress and 3 more children in a townhouse on the Upper East Side, sucker for punishment. He reorganized the threat of electronic surveillance from investigators and forbade his underlings, under penalty of death, from uttering his name. He eventually wound up on prison tapes, speaking openly with family members, including a panicked call on 911. More incredibly and indelibly, the ultimately stand-up mobster played a broken-down man in a stunningly successful ruse to dodge and vex prosecutors. It was a piece of improvisational street theater that ran longer than anything on or off Broadway during his 8 decades on Earth. There were hints, whispers from informants, and finally a long-awaited admission that the whole thing was a brilliant scam. But for 3 decades, authorities were powerless to prove Gigante's sanity and convict him as they would any other criminal. Mr. Gigante's case is truly fascinating, marveled one prison psychiatrist. His ability to sustain his crazy act over many years and to have deceived at least 3 prominent forensic evaluators into believing that he was mentally ill and incompetent places Mr. Gigante in the ranks of the most cunning of criminals. A full decade before launching his long-running psychiatric charade, a prison evaluation cited Gigante's natural skills in leading such a Jekyll and Hyde existence. First tipped by a mob insider in June 1970 that Gigante's Mental Patient Act was a scam, the FBI needed another 27 years to prove the truth of this claim. It took another 6 years before the Chin finally confessed to the ruse in 2003, after federal prosecutors seemed poised to charge Gigante's family members with abating his psychiatric subterfuge. His bizarre behavior continued even behind bars. Gigante toyed with prison psychiatrists while desperately holding out hope for a successful appeal, which ultimately was rejected by the U.S. Supreme Court. Despite his national reputation, Gigante devoted his entire life to keeping his efforts carefully hidden from the eyes of the public or the hidden recorders of federal investigators. During the 1980s, his operation was as successful as any Fortune 500 business. The Genovese family raked in more than $100 million a year in profit, law enforcement said. The same authorities who charged the Chin grudgingly hailed his family as the Ivy League of organized crime and the Rolls-Royce of criminal enterprise. The Chin controlled all numbers operations in Lower Manhattan, as well as the annual St. Anthony's Fest in his neighborhood, where he turned piety into profit. By 1985, when Gigante was surreptitiously running the Genovese family, and Anthony Fat Tony Salerno took the law enforcement heat as its straw boss, the family's assorted illegal enterprises included gambling, extortion, loan sharking, and bid rigging. The Genovese influence extended to the garbage, concrete, construction, and music industries. They held an iron grip on the labor that allowed them to dominate the New Jersey waterfront, the Javits Convention Center, and the Fulton Fish Market. The family was stealing money on every window installed at the city's vast housing projects and skimming cash from New York's enormous concrete industry. Gigante boasted a workforce of more than 400 dedicated men at his 24-hour beck and call. In the Mafia galaxy, no mob star burned brighter than the famously nocturnal Gigante. The alleged status of Vincent Gigante as boss of the Genovese organized crime family makes him the sun around which all the planetary criminal activities revolve, observed U.S. District Court Judge I. Leo Glasser. Yet the titan of the legal industry was most notorious for his Oddfather routine, where he played a serial psychiatric hospital patient who wandered the city streets clad only in his ratty bathrobe, well-worn pajamas, and a decrepit pair of slippers. Gigante occasionally added a floppy cap to complete the carefully mismatched ensemble. Gigante, on close to 30 occasions, admitted himself to a suburban mental hospital for treatment of his self-diagnosed mental illness. Among his mafia pals, the visits were genially known as tune-ups, each one added to his wacky aura of invincibility, sparing him prosecution while ensuring his continued reign atop the world of organized crime. Interesting. The brutal gangster and his doddering alter ego lived side by side within the Chin and helped him become the most successful mob boss of the last half century. He surprised headline making next generation mafioso like Gotti, only old time leaders like Frank Costello, and even the namesake of his crime family and his mob mentor, Vito Genovese. You know, every time a mob boss gets indicted, he becomes the most powerful boss, said former federal prosecutor Greg O'Connell. John Gotti captured a lot of attention, but we knew Gigante was the guy. The Chin was the capo de tutti capi, the boss of bosses, really. His long and successful reign was inexorably linked to his strange persona, captured in scores of FBI surveillance photos and witnessed by countless passersby on the streets of Greenwich Village. Gigante couldn't do it alone. It took a village of cooperating relatives, neighbors, and mobsters to support the performance and spare him from the clutches of law enforcement. But the Chin was the unquestioned star of this production, which improbably mingled mob hits with method acting. Marlon Brando is in a dingy bathrobe. His was an extraordinarily run atop one of the New York's five mafia families from the early 1980s into the new millennium, when the constantly pursuing feds and trigger-happy fellow mobsters ensured a steady turnover of leadership in New York's other four families. The Chin and the Genovese always rose above the fray. To provide proper perspective, Gigante spent more time in office than four-term President Franklin Delano Roosevelt did in the White House, and FDR didn't spend his time dodging death threats, ordering executions, and avoiding federal bugs. But the Chin was more than a gangster whose life paralleled the explosive growth of the Mafia in the 20th century United States, along with its decline in the 21st. He became a part of pop culture. His ceaseless head games with prosecutors and the FBI eventually inspired a memorable episode of Law and Order, the tale of the dodgy Uncle Junior on The Sopranos, and a satiric novel, I Don't Want to Go to Jail, by New York newspaper columnist Jimmy Breslin. Gigante became a headline writer's dream at the New York tabloids, where his exploits were chronicled in big, bold, black type, The Odd Father, with tales that only seemed to confirm his legendary lunacy. Breslin's novel referenced the Chin's real-life devotion to two women, both named Olympia, on either side of the Hudson River. It was a maneuver consistent with the mores of 1960s Greenwich Village, the Chin's longtime home and base of operations, but hardly acceptable among the hardline, old-school men of the mob. Yet no one dared challenge the Chin about his dual domestic lives or anything else. From inside his headquarters, the dank Triangle Civic Improvement Association, and from behind bars, Gigante oversaw an era of relative peace and prosperity for his family in a business where homicide marks a management change and treachery remains a remarkable skill. In contrast, Gotti's run atop the Gambino family lasted barely 7 years before he went away to die in the same Missouri prison where Gigante eventually followed. The Chin proved far more adaptable. As the mob's founding mustache Pete's made way for the next generation, he rose through the ranks in the 1950s and 60s as a protege of Genovese. His ascension continued through the turbulent 1970s, and the Gigante assumed his seat as boss in 1981, when other bosses, including Gotti, went to jail in the 1980s and 90s. The Chin dodged prosecution and stayed on top of the Genovese family into the new millennium, even after the feds finally put him in prison. I have to go get, this is my weed is here. Pardon my interruption again, but life really does get in the way. Maybe I should do my readings at night, but I just got my package from Canada Post and Justin Trudeau, and I remember the spot I'm at here, so, but seeing how we're here, I might as well celebrate my first order with a veil. That's our Veterans Marijuana Company. So that's super cool, and I got all, look at that, the way they send it to you. I got all single pre-rolls, so I got some of those ones too, but all the single pre-rolls, these are, I think that's a farm gas one. Yeah, farm gas. That's what I'm going to smoke right now, and then I'll continue, I'll smoke while I read the book. How about that? So farm gas it is. I think this one's like about 30-something%. Well, you get 3 of them. They're little ones, right? I hate that little paper. So that was pretty dramatic. Too bad I didn't have the camera turned at the window. Rio goes crazy. He jumps up on that chair. Farm gas. Thanks, Avail. First order's in. All right. So where I left off at here was the Chin dodged prosecution and stayed on top of the Genovese family into the new millennium, even after the feds finally put him in prison. Even his installation as Genovese boss, the culmination of his Mafia career, was swathed in secrecy. Gigante demoted predecessor Salerno, but arranged for Fat Tony to serve as a figurehead. The cigar-chomping, fedora-wearing old-timer took a 100-year prison term after his conviction as a member of the mob's ruling commission, leaving the Chin free and in charge. Salerno died behind bars rather than rat out the real boss. Gigante stayed on the streets and at the top of the family. Gigante invested more than 3 decades of his life in pretending he was certifiably insane, a performance that included small touches, not shaving or combing his hair, and grand ones, greeting FBI agents as he stood naked in the shower holding an umbrella. By one count, he duped a half dozen psychiatrists into 34 separate diagnoses of schizophrenia as he operated with impunity atop the Genovese family. But that's nice weed. Highly recommend it. His efforts rivaled the Oscar-winning work of Jack Nicholson in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, with one difference. If Randy P. McMurphy wanted out of the mental hospital, Gigante returned there again and again. The dedication to his craft earned Gigante his memorable tabloid sobriquet, the Odd Father, along with the respect of his underlings. His family revered him, said George Stambouladis, the federal prosecutor who led the team that finally convicted Gigante. Forces on both sides of the law were equally impressed by a show that at times resembled something conjured up by the director Scorsese and the LSD king, Owsley Stanley. Imagine Goodfellas on a bad acid trip. John Pritchard Jr. ran the FBI's Genovese squad in the mid-1980s as the agency tried desperately to convict the elusive Chin. He came away with a reluctant respect for the mob boss. Chin was probably the most feared gangster in New York, said Pritchard. He was so clever. He was a quiet, calculating, behind-the-scenes guy. Chin didn't want people to know he was the boss. It was enough that the people in the neighborhood knew. He was known among the people as a guy who could get things done, a la the Godfather. Pritchard was among the first to use the phrase most often used to describe the Chin's dependence on the insanity defense, crazy like a fox. Philip Leonetti, an Atlantic City mobster with a vast knowledge of Mafia lore, put Gigante in a class by himself. Within our family, we viewed the Chin as a very, very smart man, a very secretive man, very cunning and very ruthless. Leonetti recalled, he was old school Cosa Nostra. Stay low, follow the rules, and make money. He wasn't flashy. I mean, Christ, he spent his whole day in a bathrobe. He wasn't trying to be a celebrity. He wasn't a gangster, and he knew this thing. He was a gangster, and he knew this thing, La Cosa Nostra, this thing, better than anyone in the country. Leonetti was a dead-on assessment. Gigante did not keep a standing reservation at the Copacabana or pose for photos with an arm wrapped around Frank Sinatra or chase showgirls around the Las Vegas Strip. His primary interests were the Genovese family, the prestige, the power. He was comfortable in the confines of Sullivan Street. There was money too, but it mattered less to Gigante that his peers atop the other families. Part of his crew's loyalty was based on the Chin's generosity when it came to kicking up cash, a standard mob practice where the family head receives a percentage of every illegal dollar pocketed. Gigante routinely allowed his capos to keep money that would routinely go to his contemporaries astride New York's four other crime families. He became the last acolyte of fading tradition, a true believer in a disappearing world, a man of old values surrounded by thugs and turncoats. He never abandoned his roots, geographic or otherwise. Gigante seized control of the Genovese family during the Ronald Reagan presidency. By the time he pleaded guilty in April of 2003 on federal charges of lying to doctors about his mental health, it was Reagan who was suffering from Alzheimer's. The Chin's reign became a constant in an ever-changing world. Three post-Reagan presidents filled the Oval Office during his time as boss, and the Soviet Union collapsed as his crime family thrived. The World Trade Center was twice targeted by terrorists. There was a bombing in Atlanta and at the Olympics. And the New York Rangers won their first Stanley Cup since 1940 when Gigante, living a couple miles south of Madison Square Garden, had celebrated his 12th anniversary, or 12th birthday. What the heck? Gigante endured firmly entrenched as the Howard Hughes of organized crime. Long after he didn't need the money or the aggravation, the Chin remained the largest boss in the nation's biggest city, the craziest gangster since the hot-headed Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, who was the real thing. At the end, after spending the last 8 years of his life behind bars, Gigante returned to the village for his funeral mass, a small and exclusive gathering of family and friends. There was none of the pomp associated with many mob farewells, the endless floral arrangements or lengthy funeral cortege. His life had come full circle, a final farewell in the old neighborhood, just the way the Chin would have wanted it. He didn't move far, said Henry Hill, the former Lucchese family operator who turned federal informant in the early 1980s. All that money, that so-called power, the power to assassinate and kill, and he hasn't left a 4-block area in 40 years. 39 minutes in here, but that was quite a nice little pre-roll there. Farm gas. Chapter 2, Positively Sullivan Street. I'll just go for another 15 minutes or so here, till an hour. Vincent Louis Gigante, the fourth of Salvatore and Yolanda Gigante's 6 boys, arrived at a home still shrouded in loss and grief. The parents were Italian immigrants, married in their native Naples on October 20th, 1920. Holy shit. Before setting off for New York City in an era's tidal wave of new arrivals from their homeland. Records from Ellis Island show Salvatore and Yolanda, her name misspelled as Iolanda, arrived 3 days after New York's in the 1921 crossing the Atlantic aboard an Italian ship, the Passero. He was 25 and his bride just 18. Imagine that, eh? Back in the day. At 5'4", with black hair and brown eyes, Salvatore listed his occupation as workman, while Yolanda described herself as housewife. Handwritten beneath a question about their intended length of stay was the notion permanently. The newlyweds would find a home in Manhattan, joining relatives already living in Greenwich Village. As they did for all new arrivals, the ship's captain and surgeon signed off on documents attesting to Gigante's mental and physical well-being. Both Gigante checked the yes box when asked if they could read. The couple settled into a tenement at 181 Thompson Street, sharing the space with Salvatore's brother Louis and his wife. Salvatore and Yolanda would spend their whole lives in the neighborhood, never moving beyond a radius of a few blocks, relocating only to find space for their expanding family on or to stay ahead of the wrecking ball in the constantly evolving area. Gigante soon welcomed 3 boys, Pascal, Mario, and Vincent. Salvatore, a jeweler by trade, hustled to support the family, and like many of the local women, Yolanda picked up work as a seamstress, specializing in piecework for ladies' coats. It was during a rare vacation that the hard-working young couple endured a heartbreaking blow. During a 1925 trip home to see family in Naples, 18-month-old Vincent suffered horrific burns from an accidental spill of a large pot of water boiling for pasta. The child spent 2 agonizing weeks in the hospital before dying. The devastated Gigantes returned to the village, where they welcomed their 4th child in March 29, 1928. There was a little debate. The new arrival, another boy, would be named for his late brother. An unbreakable bond between mother and son was forged, one that would last 2 lifetimes. Vincent's doting mom provided her boy with the nickname that followed him through his life. Although the name would one day echo with menace, it sprang from her love. My mother, as a Neapolitan woman, will call him Cenzino or Cenzino. It's diminutive of Vincenzo, little Vincent, explained Louis Gigante. That's how he got the name, because Mama would call him Vincenzo or call him Cenzino. Jeez. She never spoke English to him, Vincenzo, so the kids call him Chin. The village was already heavily Italian. By the time Gigantes arrived, more than 50,000 Italians settled in the neighborhood between the 1880s and 1920s. The vast majority were young single men. By 1920, The area was about 30% Italian and supported a pair of churches catering to the new arrivals. Our Lady of Pompeii on Carmen Street and the nation's oldest Italian American parish, St. Anthony of Padua, incorporated in 1859 and located on Sullivan Street. The city's first Italian American mayor, Fiorello LaGuardia, was born in 1882 on the same street as both Vincents. The village had earned a reputation as a haven for artists and eccentrics. Mark Twain once walked the local streets, as did Bohemian social activist journalist John Reed. The insular neighborhood was also home to a long tradition of taking care of its own and minding its own business, particularly among its Italian immigrant community. The village padrone was a local fixer able to provide an assortment of services for his constituents. It could be anything from a job opportunity to notarizing documents to arranging steamship tickets for a trip back to Italy. Among the first padrones was Louis Fogesi, who immigrated to the village in 1869 from his hometown of Liguria. Fogesi was still living on Bleecker Street when Louis Gigante arrived. The old man died in 1930. A Neapolitan immigrant named Vito Genovese would fill his shoes. With the arrival of Ralph and their last son, Louis, the Gigante family was complete. The 5 sons were raised as devout Roman Catholics, with Sunday Mass a regular part of their routine. Yolanda always favored Our Lady of Pompeii on Carmen Street. The Bureau of Prisons, in a 1960s evaluation, characterized Chin's childhood as normal and healthy. Louis Gigante said the brothers, though born years apart, remained a tight-knit group despite the difference in ages. The connection to one another and to the village streets remained, and it endured unbroken as they grew into adulthood. During a sit-down years later with prison officials, the Chin recalled the #1 household rule: respect your parents. Each boy was assigned regular household chores, and Gigante's only bad memories of childhood were dealing with a speech impediment and a minor heart condition. Gigante, who described Salvatore and Yolanda as a loving couple, could not recall a single instance where he watched his parents fight. Salvatore was only occasionally moved to spank one of the misbehaving boys. Mom Yolanda's method of discipline involved a paralyzing stare, which young Vincent inherited, using it to great effect in later life. A happy childhood was Gigante's recollection decades later. By all accounts, the future mob boss was a penchant for bathrobes, dressed quite normally too. Chin specifically mentioned that he was always quite close with his mother. There were, he added, no family secrets, although there was one sad chapter in their history. Gigante's maternal grandmother committed suicide at age 37. The circumstances were strange. He swallowed poison to avoid testifying against the Black Hand, a mafia-esque group operating in Naples. fearful his family would be targeted if he took the stand. Pascal Scotto took his own life. Though living in the nation's largest city, the boys were raised as if they remained in their late grandfather's homeland. My mother and father were not Americans, said Louis Gigante. They were Neapolitans. Their culture and everything was completely imposed upon us, the way they knew life. The Gigante kids learned English on the streets and at school as their parents spoke strictly Neapolitan at home. Never spoke English until I was in school, recalled Louis Gigante. Being the youngest, the other four brothers spoke English to me. I just never heard it from my mother. Salvatore landed a job on Canal Street with a jewelry business started by another immigrant, William Kelly. He hung out with the Irish jewelers. You know how he made his money? Asked Louis Gigante. He worked there with them, and then he would be their representative in the Italian neighborhood. Every woman who was getting married would go to him, and he would display the rings in the house. With the onset of the Great Depression and hard times in the jewelry business, Salvatore took other work, including one stint with the newly New Deal sponsored Works Progress Administration, WPA. I was very proud of him, recalled Lewis. My father worked all his life. He was a living and supported he made a living and supported us very well. Yolanda chipped in too, bringing sewing work home to the cramped apartment, much to Salvatore's dismay. A good Neapolitan wife was supposed to raise the children and cook the meals. Salvatore, his pride stung, took his wife's sewing machine and sold it. I was angry a little, she recalled decades later, but don't you worry. I bought a second-hand machine for $10 and worked day and night. The Gigante's family economic fortunes improved once Salvatore landed a better job in the jewelry trade, but it required a long commute. Newark, Newark. Poor guy had to go to Newark all his life, said Louis Gigante, and he was an engraver in in a big jewelry company. That was what he did. He didn't just engrave initials. He's cutting the stones. Each night, the entire family would gather at the dinner table to discuss the day's events in two languages. It was an essential part of their life, with each of the boys expected to contribute to the ongoing conversation. The sons addressed each other in English while the parents spoke only in their native tongue. As young Vincent was finding his footing in the world, the nascent American version of La Cosa Nostra was starting its bloody evolution into the powerful institution that became an integral part of New York City's for the next 8 decades. Gigante's mob mentor, Vito Genovese, was smack in the middle of the mob wars that gave birth to the five families of New York. The crime family that would carry the Genovese name emerged from a period of unprecedented bloodshed and betrayal. Genovese arrived in the New World in 1913, a teenage boy whose family left their own village in Naples to settle south of the Gigantes on the Lower East Side. The young man quickly gravitated toward a life of crime and easy money, falling in with a group of like-minded and ambitious Italian immigrants. A Sicilian youth named Giuseppe Bonanno, rechristened himself Joe in his new country, followed the same path. Bonanno eventually became the right-hand man of Salvatore Maranzano. Yeah, probably do 2 more pages. Known respectively as Don Torito, Maranzano was a barrel-chested bull capable of breaking a man's neck by using only his thumbs, a very useful skill in their new enterprise. The boss carried himself with an air of class and legitimacy despite his illegitimate business. Maranzano boasted of speaking Latin and Greek and proclaimed himself well-versed in classical literature. He attended the seminary, studying to become a priest before opting for a more secular career. A handsome, understated man. The only jewelry he wore was a watch and his wedding ring. He looked just like a banker, said Joe Valachi, a street hustler later inducted into the Maranzano ranks. You'd never guess in a million years that he was a racketeer. Maranzano established an import-export company in Little Italy as a cover for his booze business during Prohibition. Decades later, in his novel, author Mario Puzo's fictional Corleone family did much the same with their olive oil operation. But the dominant family belonged to Giuseppe Joe the Boss Maranzano, or Mazzario, who rose to prominence during the bootlegging days of the Roaring Twenties. His group was rife with young, hungry talent, which included a quartet of future bosses: Charles Lucky Luciano, Gaetano Lucchese, Vito Genovese, and Francesco Castiglia, who later was reinvented with an Irish-sounding first name and surname Frank Costello. Barely 5 feet tall, Mazzaria would casually demolish a 5-course meal complete with wine with the gusto of a dog tearing through a bucket of steaks. He did so with about the same amount of grace. The two factions were soon at odds, with the demand by the imperious Mazzaria setting off a bloodletting later dubbed the Castelmarese War, a nod to a small civilian coastal town once called home by many of the Maranzano's troops. The boss demanded $10,000 in tribute from his underlings, asserting it was his right as the capo di capi. Tutti capi. Conflict inevitably followed. Maranzano presented himself as the populist choice, the antithesis of greedy Mafia. Jesus, all these Italian names are so hard to pronounce. Massaria, in the bloody battle that ran roughly across the 18 savage months in 1930 through 1931. The fighting became so fierce that Bonanno delayed his wedding to work full-time for the Maranzano forces. Dozens of men on both sides were killed in the struggle. The need for soldiers led to Maranzano's induction of Valachi in a secret Mafia ceremony. The East Harlem resident's life of crime began as an 18-year-old getaway driver for burglary ring and ended decades down the road with his decision to become the first mafioso to turn informant. An act of pure treachery would end the war, with Luciano and an up-and-comer growing increasingly frustrated by Masario's intransigence in the way of making money, finally selling out its boss. It was anything but lucky when Luciano invited Mascherano to lunch in Coney Island on April 15th, 1931. Before meeting with Joe, the boss, Luciano, reportedly accompanied by Genovese, arranged a quiet meeting with Maranzano and concocted the plot that would end the hostilities. They met at a private home in Brooklyn, where the conversations fraught with importance was nonetheless clipped and quick. "Do you know why you are here?" Maranzano asked in Sicilian. "Yes," Luciano replied. "Then I don't need to tell you what has to be done," Maranzano inquired. "No." The lunch date was set for the Nuovo Villa Tamaro restaurant on West 15th Street near the renowned Luna Park, and at a relatively new attraction, a roller coaster known as the Cyclone. The typically wary Mazziria arrived in a steel-armored sedan with inch-thick windows. Luciano later recounted Mazzaria's last meal, a 3-hour orgy of food and drink consumed in a veritable feeding frenzy. The meal was followed by a card game, with Luciano excusing himself to use the men's room. The sounds of gunfire soon rang out inside the quiet Italian restaurant after. According to Luciano, the shooters included Genovese, Siegel, and Albert Anastasia. Masseria's body was riddled by a half-dozen bullets, and his body was found still holding the ace of spades in one hand. All right, so that's an hour. A few more pages to go to the end of that chapter, but I think I will call it on page 19 of The Chin. Yeah, he's an interesting guy. I'm sure this, I can't wait to read further into this book and go right into the dirty deeds of Chin Gigante and the life and crimes of Mafia boss Chin Gigante. It's a pretty good book, pretty interesting. I like organized crime or mafia subject, whatever. I mean, that's pretty cool too that like their family. I know, like I had a friend, or it was actually my cousin's friend on the mainland, and they were Italian. I remember growing up wanting to be Italian because it's all around this era, right? And it was always popular, like Godfather and whatnot. And this friend of ours, we'd like shoot robins in this guy's berry and his garden, and then we'd take all the birds to Claudio's mom, and she'd pick all the feathers off them and debone them or whatever she did, put them in the spaghetti, and we ate it all the time. And we always thought it was cool going there because we could drink wine there, right? That was different. We liked their Italian heritage. It was really one big family. It was like, like what you see in the movies. I really like that. I'll never forget that guy. It was always really cool to go there and be a part of their Italian family and feel like you're in the mafia. And ironically, my uncle Jim, my mother's brother, he was a Teamster president and a truck driver. And the joke always used to be with him too was, and his name was Ginny, and the joke with him was always that Jimmy Hoffa, because he was the president of the Teamsters in BC, I guess it would have been for. Yeah. back in the day. Kind of funny, yeah. Yeah, anyway, that's going to be my video here for today. Probably blaze another one of these. I'd like to read another book, but probably won't today. If you've made it this far in the video, please be sure to give us a like. I see I got a couple likes. That's nice. Thank you. Maybe a couple more would be okay. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe to my channel. I see a lot crappier content out there than this. And I don't know if you caught my movie the other day there. I did a little movie. I think it was called, what was it called? Dogs Run and Walk. Yeah. It was nice up to the horse park the other day for a little run around with the dogs. But today, I'm just taking it easy. I have a pile of books to read, and I'm not really a big reader, like I say, and now I don't really want to read my books because I want to read them on YouTube or whatever. Or I hope to get something better going than this, but format, I should really step outside of my box and do the StreamYard stream or whatever, but I just do it right off my webcam here, and I don't know, just reading, man, just reading. Reading is, it's hard to read out loud too, and for an hour, and to receive negative comments and that too, so I just turn the comments off. I don't want to read it. It's distracting. I don't need negativity. So I'll just keep on reading. Anyways, I read you 5 by 5. I'm out.